Okay, so next thing in our quick look at positional chess, open and closed positions. Quick reminder, what do I mean by positional chess? Well, basically, most situations, when you become a better player or you're playing against a better player, you're not just going to find that people blunder away pieces and you can just take a loose bishop or a loose rook and win that way. You're going to have to learn to slowly but surely just make little improvements to your position until eventually you've improved it so much that those tactics and those wins of pieces just happen because you're just in so much of a better position. So we had a look at pawn formation and a few other bits and pieces. This time we're going to have a quick look at open and closed positions. Neither is necessarily better than the other, but they do require a different style of play. So open positions with not much in the middle of the board is going to be very tactical. There's going to be the long range pieces flying across the board, all sorts of threats to look for, probably quite a lot of calculation. And you might find a player like Mikhail Tal, world champion from the 50s, would love that sort of thing. Whereas his compatriot, Tigran Petrosian, a world champion, I think slightly after Tal, but similar period, tended to prefer the closed positions and slow manoeuvring. And people used to say playing Petrosian was like playing a boa constrictor because it slowly suffocate you to death. So it never was these tactical fireworks, but you just suddenly would find you had no moves left. Quite a different way of playing. So neither's better than the other. It's just a question of style. But let's have a look. So here's an example of what we would call a fairly closed position. Why is it closed? Well, the pawns are pretty much locked together in the middle of the board. So you can see the white pawn, c4, d3, e4. Where's my cursor? There it is. And the black one, c5, d6, e5. They're just locked together. Neither of the d pawns is likely to move anytime soon because they'll just be taken. And it says that's not really a lot going on in the middle of the board. Any action that's likely to take place is going to be at the edges. So maybe just white might play a3 and b4 at some point. Doesn't work straight away because there's too many pieces on that square. Or white might move this knight and try f4, things like that. Black would have pretty similar plans. Just at a glance, the only thing that's maybe a tiny advantage for white is that the black pawns are on black squares, so that restricts the black bishop, whereas the white pawn isn't blocked by his own men. But it's pretty level, it's pretty closed. And unless you're Petrosian, you're probably going to find it pretty hard to make much progress in this particular situation. So it doesn't mean that it's a bad position. Nobody's losing. It's just nobody's particularly winning. And it's going to take quite a long time for either side to make any real progress here. So not likely to be any tactical fireworks. Yeah, it's going to be a slow grind, this one. But nobody's losing, but nobody's winning either. And it's going to take a long time to find out where the game goes. This one now, we've got a fairly open position, fairly open. So compared to the last position, there's far fewer pawns in the middle of the board. Just got a couple of white centre pawns there, or centre-ish, in the case of that one. One black centre pawn, d6, pointing at e5. That's fine. So yeah, okay, it's what we would call a half open position, and it's a typical position that would come out of an opening. Yeah, white has the advantage of the move, so a bit more space, a bit more control of the centre, but black's okay. A little bit cramped, but you'd expect that. Nothing wrong here, but fairly open, fairly level. But you can see things are going to happen. You know, e5 might be coming, and there's just stuff happening, but not a big crowded wall of pawns in the middle of the board. Okay. Now, this is a very, very open position. Now, here we've got absolutely nothing in the middle of the board. And you can see that the bishops are going to be sweeping across the board. The rooks are going to be flying up and down these long files. The queens are free to roam around. It's a very, very open position. Lots and lots is going to be happening in the middle of the board here. Again, not saying that either side is winning particularly, it's actually dead level on material. Game might even turn out to be a draw. But there's lots of activity, there's lots of moves for, say, these bishops pointing through the middle of the board. Same with the white one, even this bishop can come out here, and it's just stuff going on. Very, very open, very little in the middle of the board. And so this kind of leads to a question, which is you would probably need to work out that certain pieces are more useful in different types of position. So in this one, whilst we're not saying that the knights are rubbish, because there's nothing getting in the way, you're probably going to prefer bishops to knights. If we go back thinking about the closed board from a couple of diagrams ago, quickly swing back, it may well be that the bishops are not so much use as the knights because the knights can jump over things. So what's going on the board makes a difference to which pieces you actually want. And indeed, in some ways, if you've got pawns in the center on both sides, a player that has perhaps a bishop and two knights is probably going to want to keep those pawns locked up, because against a player with two bishops and a knight, it sounds a bit strange, but the two bishops and the knight on an open board will be better than two knights against a bishop, even though they're both worth 9. So it's a difficult balancing act, trying to work out what's going on. So one of the skills of positional play is to work out which pieces are better in a given position and which ones will be better later in the game. And it is a question of judgment. It's where playing through Grandmaster games from books or the internet can help, because you can learn from their ideas. It'd be a great idea. Go onto YouTube and find some YouTube chess players who will annotate and discuss games, so you can really learn from what you see the masters doing here, which pieces are better and when. So guidelines: bishops and rooks are long-range pieces. They like open boards. So do the queens, obviously. But bishops and rooks like the board to be open so they can move around freely. The inverse is true about the knights. They much prefer closed positions so they can jump over things that are in the way. But it takes a knight 3 moves to get from one side to the other. So they tend to like closed games. Bishops and rooks like open ones. Now, queens really like open boards because, of course, they're bishop and rook combined. If the position is closed and you find yourself with bishops and the enemy has knights, try to open it up so that your ranged bishops become more dangerous. The opposite is true. If the position is very, very open and you have knights against bishops, try to close it up or try to swap off their bishops for your knights. Bishops like open boards, knights like closed ones. As with everything in chess, there's the odd exception, but generally speaking, the more open the board, the more you're going to prefer the bishops to the knights, especially in the endgame. If you have a weak piece, see if you can do something to swap it off or improve it. So if somebody has a really, really strong knight in the middle of your position and you have a bishop that's not doing a great deal, maybe you should see if you can try and play bishop takes knight and make that swap. Things like that. So if you have a weak piece, can you swap it off or can you improve it? If you have a bishop that's trapped behind your pawns, imagine in your head that your bishop is on e2 and you have pawns at d3, f3 and e4. Can you move the d pawn or the f pawn to let your bishop out? If the enemy has a good piece, swap it off or block it. Okay, so you may not be able to win the game straight away by winning material. The opponent isn't going to just leave their queen under attack for you. Ping. But yeah, so the enemy's not just going to make mistakes for you. What you'll need to do is gradually improve your position. So yeah, if it comes to it, swap their good pieces off for one of yours. Improve your position bit by bit. Okay, so that said, time for you to go play some games. Remember to write down the moves as you go along so that you can analyze what's going on afterwards, so you can play over the games. And then, could you have improved? Could you have swapped off a weak piece or improved a weak piece by moving it or moving a pawn to let it escape? And what about any of the enemy pieces? Are there any good enemy pieces that you might want to force to retreat, or you might want to try to swap them off? So it's all about playing. It's all about studying master games and seeing what these guys have done. Just quickly, the left, Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov, both world champions from the 1980s. One Russian, one Azerbaijan, but both were USSR. And I think they're okay now, but lots and lots of backstories between their games in the 1980s about the Russians trying to sort of help Karpov because they didn't like Kasparov, who was a very sort of independent guy. Really interesting stories. On the right, go across to the right here, Bobby Fischer. This is 1972. I'm just circling Bobby now, playing against Boris Spassky. That's the height of the Cold War. So the Russians, the USSR, and the Americans really hating each other. And in 1972, chess was the headline sport for a couple of months while these two guys were playing. Again, an amazing backstory. And considering the animosity between Russia and America at the time, actually Spassky and Fischer were very friendly with each other, very respectful. The Fischer, after he won this match in 1972, became world champion and never actually played another game of tournament chess until the early 1990s. He was a recluse. He just didn't want to play anymore. He's quite the character. And then you see him again the next time he did play. There's Fischer. There's Spassky. And 20 odd years later, of course, by this time, not as strong as they were back in the 70s, they actually played a rematch of their world championship. Fischer came out of hiding, out of retirement to play a rematch with Spassky. And yeah, not quite such a high standard of chess, although they're still very, 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 very good. So just some interesting backstories. Anyway, enough of my waffling. Time for you to get back to your chess. Enjoy.